There is no trifling with nature. It is always true, grave and severe. It is always in the light, and the faults and errors fall to our share. It defies incompetency, but reveals its secrets to the competent, the truthful, and the pure. Writes Goethe in Faust. Have you ever felt that peculiar ache, that nameless yearning that no earthly satisfaction seems to quiet? That whispered promise that somewhere, somehow, there must be something more than this? If so, you've already encountered the Faustian spirit that exists within each of us. That restless force that refuses to accept the boundaries of human limitation. That transcending spirit within each. Contemplate for a moment your own forbidden dreams, those secret aspirations you hardly dare acknowledge. Perhaps it's the desire to know what lies beyond death, to understand the deepest mysteries and paradoxes of consciousness, to touch something eternal and ineffable in our mortal, fleeting existence. If you think these are idle fantasies, let us and Goethe prove that you are wrong. Because these are the same story that haunted humanity for millennia. A story that commences with a historical figure, but ends in the depths of your own psyche. This eternal human yearning found its most profound expression in a story that began 5 centuries ago, when in 16th century Germany, a wandering scholar named Johann Georg Faust ignited whispers and controversies that would eventually crystallize into one of humanity's most revealing myths. But as you dig deeper into his story, you'll discover that you're not merely examining an historical figure or literary character. You're exploring a map of your own inner landscape, a territory where your highest aspirations meet your deepest fears. It's probably the most dangerous myth that ever existed. The Faust myth endures not because it's a clever tale of supernatural bargains, but because it illuminates something fundamental about your own experience as a human being. When you stand at the edge of known knowledge, feeling that vertiginous mix of terror and excitement before the infinite unknown, you're experiencing what Faust felt. Think of that moment when you've glimpsed something beyond your ordinary understanding, perhaps in contemplating the vastness of space, in the depths of meditation, or in that flash of insight that seems to come from nowhere. That simultaneous attraction and terror you felt? That's what Rudolf Otto called mysterium tremendum. The trembling awe we feel in the presence of something both terrifying and fascinating. The hallmark of all genuine encounters with the sacred. And it's the same force that drove Faust to his fateful bargain. You'll discover that the Faustian calling is not a mere legend. No, dear seeker, it's a living pattern that plays out in your own life, in your own struggles with limitations and aspirations, in your own hunger for something more than ordinary existence can provide. Through understanding Faust, you'll begin to understand those restless stirrings in your own soul, those moments when the familiar world seems too small to contain your dreams. Goethe writes in his monumental Faust, "I am part of the part that once was everything, part of the darkness which gave birth to light." Mephistopheles. His bargain with Mephistopheles mirrors your own negotiations between safety and risk, between acceptance and rebellion, between the finite and the infinite. His journey maps the territory of your own deepest yearnings, your own confrontations with the mysteries that both terrify and entice. At its core, the Faustian bargain represents humanity's willingness to sacrifice eternal values for temporal power and knowledge. Faust's pact with Mephistopheles, trading his soul for unlimited knowledge and worldly pleasures, speaks to a fundamentally human desire to transcend our limitations, even at terrible cost. This bargain has become so emblematic that the term Faustian now describes any deal where one trades the essential for the expedient, the eternal for the temporary. His bargain with Mephistopheles mirrors your own negotiations between safety and risk, between acceptance and rebellion, between the finite and the infinite. A drama that plays out not just in myth, but in the depths of every human psyche. If you are new here, welcome to Irrevelato. I unveil the secrets you deserve to know. If you know who I am, you also know I love you, my dear friend. As always, links are in the description, and let's see what secrets we discover today. Let's bring back the Promethean fire and light. Bring our way into the darkness and genius of the Faustian myth and magic. Let's talk about Faust. Goethe writes, "Truth is a torch, but a tremendous one. That is why we hurry past it, shielding our eyes, indeed, in fear of getting burned." The destiny of Gilgamesh is very similar to the Faustian quest. After his friend Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh becomes obsessed with immortality, traveling to the ends of the earth seeking the secret of eternal life. When he finally reaches Utnapishtim, the survivor of the great flood who was granted immortality by the gods, Utnapishtim tells him, "The life that you seek you will never find. When the gods created man, they allotted him death, but life they retained in their own keeping." This rejection echoes through history, the fundamental boundary between mortal and divine knowledge that heroes repeatedly try to cross. This first recorded rejection of mortal limits presages Faust's own rebellion. The parallel proves striking. Both Gilgamesh and Faust seek forbidden knowledge, both confront supernatural powers, both ultimately fail to transcend human bounds. The archetype of the Lightbringer appears most dramatically in the figure of Lucifer, whose name literally means bearer of light or morning star. In Isaiah 14:12 we find the famous pronouncement, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" This celestial rebel who dared to challenge divine authority represents perhaps the ultimate prototype of Faustian aspiration. The parallel becomes particularly significant when we consider that medieval grimoires often referred to Lucifer not as a demon of darkness, but as an angel of enlightenment who possessed the secrets of nature and creation. The Persian god Mithra offers another fascinating parallel. In Mithraic mysteries, the deity slays the cosmic bull in a cave, an act that brings light and life to the world. This deed represents the triumph of knowledge over nature's darkness. Carl Jung was particularly fascinated by Mithraic symbolism, seeing in it a precedent for the alchemical great work that would later influence Goethe's Faust. The Mithraic initiate, like Faust, had to pass through 7 degrees of initiation, each representing a planetary sphere and a level of enlightenment. In Hindu mythology, we find the tale of churning the ocean of milk, where both gods and demons must cooperate to obtain Amrita, the elixir of immortality. This presents an interesting contrast to Western myths. Here, the pursuit of divine knowledge requires the integration of opposing forces rather than their conflict. The Buddhist concept of the bodhisattva, who approaches but refuses final enlightenment to help others, provides yet another perspective on the relationship between human and divine wisdom. Prometheus's theft of fire, as analyzed in Carl Karenyi's landmark work, Prometheus, Archetypal Image of Human Existence, 1963, also establishes the pattern of divine punishment for human presumption. Karenyi writes, "Prometheus represents not merely technical man, but man thinking, man trying to light up the darkness of existence with the torch of knowledge." The parallel to Faust becomes explicit in Goethe's dedication to Prometheus, 1773. "Cover thy spacious heavens, Zeus, thou must leave my earth standing." Prometheus's gift of fire represents more than mere technical knowledge. Aeschylus, in Prometheus Bound, has the Titan declare, "I caused mortals to cease foreseeing their doom. I placed in them blind hopes." This complex gift, both enlightenment and illusion, mirrors precisely the ambiguous nature of Mephistopheles' offerings to Faust. Moreover, the eternal punishment of Prometheus, having his liver eaten daily by an eagle, reflects the perpetual nature of the seeker's torment, the price of forbidden knowledge being endless suffering rather than simple death. And of course, the Egyptian Book of Thoth, circa 1500 BCE, sharpens this theme. Prince Neferkaptar's pursuit of Thoth's hidden book of wisdom leads to death, his own, his wife's, his child's. The text warns, "He who reads this book will know every means of deceiving both gods and men, but his heart will never rest again in the world." Here lies the precise prototype of the Faustian bargain, knowledge purchased with peace of mind. The Egyptian tradition offers multiple parallels beyond the Book of Thoth. The god Thoth himself, as scribe of the gods and keeper of divine wisdom, represents a more benevolent version of Mephistopheles, a mediator between divine and human knowledge. The story of Isis gaining power over Ra by learning his secret name presents another variation on the theme of humans acquiring divine knowledge through cunning rather than grace. These recurring patterns, the quest for forbidden knowledge, the price of illumination, the ambiguous nature of the knowledge giver, suggest something fundamental about human consciousness. Whether we examine Gilgamesh's journey to Utnapishtim, Prometheus's theft of fire, or Lucifer's fall, we find the same essential drama. Humanity wants to transcend its limitations at terrible cost. This is the pattern that would find its most complete expression in the Faust legend. In the closing years of the 15th century, Europe stood at a crossroads of transformation. The medieval world was dying, but the modern world had not yet been born. It was in this twilight age that a remarkable figure appeared, a wandering scholar who would become both the last great magician of the Middle Ages and the first tragic hero of the modern era. The historical Johann Georg Faust emerged at a moment when three tectonic forces were reshaping the European mind. The Protestant Reformation was shattering the unified Christian worldview that had dominated for a millennium. The recovery of ancient Hermetic and Neoplatonic texts was reviving magical traditions that had lain dormant for centuries. And the first glimmers of scientific revolution were beginning to change humanity's understanding of reality itself. In this charged atmosphere, where old certainties crumbled and new possibilities beckoned, Faust moved like a lightning rod of controversy, drawing both fierce denunciation and secret admiration. Our first documentary evidence of this enigmatic figure appears in 1507, when Abbot Johannes Trithemius, himself a renowned scholar of occult matters, penned a warning about a wandering magician who styled himself Magister Georgius Sabellicus, Faustus Junior, Fons Necromanticorum, the fountain of necromancy. The title itself reveals much about the man's ambitions. By claiming to be a Faustus Junior, he was linking himself to Simon Magus, the legendary sorcerer of antiquity who had challenged St. Peter. The name Sabellicus suggested a connection to the Sabine mysteries of ancient Rome. Here was a man deliberately placing himself in an ancient lineage of magical practitioners. This mysterious figure had begun appearing in the courts and universities of Germany, demonstrating phenomena that witnesses could neither explain nor dismiss. Contemporary accounts describe his commanding presence and extraordinary claims. He carried with him a crystal ball reportedly made from the condensed breath of dying men. He claimed to possess magical texts that had once belonged to King Solomon himself. Most provocatively, he boasted that his magical feats would surpass all the miracles of Christ. Yet the historical record reveals complexity beneath the showmanship. Court records from 1509 list a Johannes Faust, receiving his bachelor's degree in theology from Heidelberg University. This suggests a man of genuine learning who moved between the worlds of conventional scholarship and occult practice. The university environment of the time was the place where medieval scholasticism met Renaissance humanism, where Aristotelian natural philosophy encountered Hermetic mysticism. Faust appears to have absorbed all these currents while transcending their traditional boundaries. His reputation grew through a combination of public demonstrations and private consultations. In Würzburg, witnesses claimed to have seen him levitate during a philosophical debate, a feat that merged spectacle with intellectual discourse in a characteristically Faustian manner. In Nuremberg, city authorities officially denied him safe passage while simultaneously expressing interest in his offers of supernatural military intelligence. This pattern would repeat throughout his career. Public condemnation coupled with private fascination from those in power. The discovery of what appears to be his laboratory in Würzburg, dating to the 1520s, provides crucial physical evidence of his actual practices. The space contains sophisticated astronomical instruments, alongside ritual objects, encrypted manuscripts next to scientific treatises. Most intriguing, the laboratory's design incorporated geometric patterns that match those found in forbidden grimoires of the period. This suggests someone working at the intersection of emerging scientific method and traditional magical practice, exactly the liminal space where the historical Faust seems most at home. Contemporary accounts paint an increasingly dramatic picture as his fame spread. Conrad Mutian's 1513 letter describes him as a vagabond, braggart and mountebank who deserves to be thrashed, yet cannot help but note his extraordinary claims and abilities. The physician Philip Beghardi, while condemning Faust's methods, felt compelled to acknowledge his remarkable gifts. Even Martin Luther himself took notice, warning his followers about this man who had made a pact with the devil. Perhaps the most valuable eyewitness account comes from Philip Melanchthon, Luther's closest associate and one of the leading intellectuals of the age. Melanchthon claimed to have met Faust personally and provided specific details about his activities and claims. According to Melanchthon, Faust boasted he could reproduce all the miracles of Christ, that he had made the victories of the imperial armies possible through his magic, and that he possessed the secret of eternal life. Yet it was Faust's death that would transform him from controversial historical figure into immortal legend. Philip Melanchthon's Table Talk provides the chilling account. This wretch came to a village in Württemberg, and when he had drunk more than enough wine, he began to brandish a sword and speak strange words. The innkeeper asked what this meant. He answered that the sword would soon cut off his head. And so it happened. After he left the room, the devil twisted his neck and he died miserably. On that stormy night in 1540, witnesses found his body in the inn, twisted at impossible angles, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. The violence of his death and the mystery surrounding it sparked immediate speculation. Had the devil finally claimed his due? Had Faust's magical experiments gone catastrophically wrong, or was there a more mundane explanation that history has obscured? The death of the historical Faust marked not an ending but a beginning. Within months, stories of his supernatural demise began circulating throughout Germany. Each retelling added new details, new claims, new significance to his life and works. What makes this transformation particularly fascinating is how quickly Faust's story became a vessel for the deepest anxieties and aspirations of an age in transition. The first written accounts reveal this process in action. In 1548, Johann Gast's Sermones Conviviales, Table Talk, portrayed Faust as traveling with a dog and horse that could transform into servants, a detail that would later influence Goethe's portrayal of Mephistopheles, first appearing as a black poodle. A 1575 letter from a student in Wittenberg described how Faust had offered to make the works of Plautus and Terence come alive on stage, suggesting an early link between magic and theatrical illusion that would prove crucial to the legend's development. But it was the 1587 publication of the Historia von der Johann Fausten that truly crystallized the legend. This anonymous work, published by Johann Spies in Frankfurt, claimed to be based on Faust's own writings and papers. While this was likely a literary device, the Historia succeeded in weaving together historical accounts, popular rumors, and elements from genuine magical traditions into a coherent narrative. Its profound impact stemmed from how it addressed the central tensions of its age, between faith and knowledge, between medieval certainty and modern doubt, between divine authority and human ambition. The Historia's Faust was not simply a magician who dabbled in forbidden arts. He was a tragic figure whose insatiable desire for knowledge led him to reject God and embrace damnation. The text presents his pact with Mephistopheles in precise, almost legal terms, reflecting the era's growing fascination with contracts and individual agency. Yet it also preserves older, folkloric elements. Faust's ability to conjure up historical figures like Alexander the Great, his magical flight on a wine barrel, his summoning of exotic delicacies for noble patrons. What's particularly remarkable is how quickly the Faust story spread beyond Germany. By 1592, Christopher Marlowe had transformed the Historia into the tragical history of Dr. Faustus, shifting the emphasis from religious warning to Renaissance tragedy. Marlowe's Faust became a kind of dark mirror of Renaissance humanism, the ultimate consequence of placing human knowledge and achievement at the center of existence. Throughout the 17th century, the legend continued to evolve through puppet plays, chapbooks, and oral traditions. Each version reflected its cultural context. English versions emphasized the theatrical and spectacular elements, French versions focused on the philosophical implications, while German versions maintained stronger connections to folk traditions and religious themes. Religious historian Mircea Eliade identified in Faust the archetypal pattern of the shaman trickster, a figure who moves between worlds and challenges established boundaries. Cultural historian Geoffrey J. Kripal sees in him the emergence of what he calls the superhuman imagination, humanity's persistent dream of transcending its limitations through knowledge or power. The transformation of Faust from historical figure to myth reveals something profound about how legends are born. As anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss observed, certain stories persist not because they accurately record historical events, but because they successfully encode and transmit fundamental patterns of human experience. The Faust legend endures because it captures something essential about our relationship with knowledge, power, and the eternal question of what price we're willing to pay for transcendence. Frank Barron's scholarly work, Dr. Faustus, From History to Legend, meticulously traces this transformation, showing how each generation found in Faust a reflection of its own struggles with knowledge and morality. The historical magician who died in a Württemberg inn became, through this process, something far more significant, a symbol of humanity's eternal aspiration to break free from its boundaries, to know the unknown, to become more than what we are. This pattern would reach its ultimate expression in Goethe's monumental Faust, but the groundwork was laid in these crucial decades when a controversial historical figure was transformed into an archetype that continues to resonate with our deepest hopes and fears about the pursuit of knowledge and the price of ambition. In the same years that Faust wandered between universities and courts, a hidden revolution was taking place in European intellectual life. Ancient magical texts, preserved in Arabic translations during the Middle Ages, were being rediscovered and translated into Latin. These grimoires, from the French Grammaire, meaning a book of formal instruction, weren't merely collections of spells, but comprehensive systems for understanding and manipulating the forces of nature. The Picatrix, perhaps the most influential of these texts, had arrived in Europe through the translation schools of Spain. This extraordinary work, whose Arabic title, Ghayat al-Hakim, means the goal of the wise, promised its readers something unprecedented. By understanding the power of the superior and inferior worlds, the wise man may perform works which seem contrary to nature. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a sophisticated attempt to map the correspondences between celestial and terrestrial realms, between microcosm and macrocosm. Contemporary records suggest Faust claimed familiarity with these texts, particularly the notorious Key of Solomon and the Book of Abramelin. What's fascinating is how these works represented a synthesis of multiple traditions: Jewish Kabbalah, Arab astrology, Egyptian Hermeticism, and Christian angelology. This synthesis aligned perfectly with Renaissance humanism's drive to recover and unify ancient wisdom traditions. Frances Yates, in her groundbreaking Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition, illuminates how this magical worldview created the intellectual climate for Faust's activities. The Renaissance magus wasn't an obscurantist rejecting reason, but rather someone seeking to understand nature's hidden correspondences. As Yates writes, natural magic occupied a liminal space between accepted and forbidden knowledge. The magus observed nature, but through the lens of cosmic sympathy and antipathy. The grimoire tradition that shaped Faust's world was far more sophisticated than modern readers might imagine. These texts operated at multiple levels simultaneously: practical, philosophical, and spiritual. Take, for example, the Picatrix's, a famous instruction for capturing planetary influences. The magician must understand not only the astronomical timing and material correspondences, but also achieve a specific state of consciousness that the text calls perfect contemplation. This integration of external and internal factors reflects a worldview where the boundaries between objective and subjective reality were far more fluid than our modern perspective allows. This fluidity becomes particularly evident in the tradition of the Key of Solomon, a text Faust allegedly possessed. While modern readers might expect a simple book of spells, the actual grimoire presents an intricate cosmological system. Its famous pentacular seals aren't merely geometric designs, but complex mathematical models of celestial relationships. Each line and angle corresponds to specific planetary aspects, while the Hebrew letters incorporate Kabbalistic numerology. When a magician drew these figures, they weren't simply copying symbols. They were recreating in miniature the mathematical harmonies that Renaissance thinkers believed governed the universe. The alchemist Michael Meyer captured this perspective in his Atalanta Fugiens, 1617, with a formula that perfectly describes the magician's approach. Nature rejoices in nature. Nature contains nature. Nature surmounts nature. This triple statement wasn't mere wordplay. It expressed the fundamental belief that natural law could be understood, contained within human consciousness, and ultimately transcended through proper knowledge and technique. The laboratory discovered in Würzburg provides physical evidence of how these theoretical principles were put into practice. The geometric patterns carved into its floor-match configurations found in the Sworn Book of Honorius, another grimoire of the period. But what's truly fascinating is how these patterns align with recent scientific understanding of how certain geometric arrangements can affect electromagnetic fields. The Renaissance magus, working from a completely different theoretical framework, had somehow intuited principles that modern physics would later confirm. This convergence between magical practice and natural philosophy was exemplified in the work of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, whose De Occulta Philosophia provided the theoretical foundation for much of Renaissance magic. Agrippa proposed that reality operated on three levels: the elemental, physical, the celestial, mathematical, and the intellectual, divine. The magician's art lay in understanding how these realms corresponded and influenced each other. When Faust claimed he could summon the spirit of Alexander the Great, he was working within this framework. The historical Alexander existed in the elemental realm, his archetypal qualities in the celestial, and his eternal essence in the intellectual sphere. The practical aspects of Renaissance magic were grounded in a sophisticated understanding of what we might today call altered states of consciousness. The magician was expected to undergo rigorous preparation before any significant operation. The Book of Abramelin, which Faust allegedly possessed, prescribed a 6-month period of purification involving specific prayers, dietary restrictions, and meditation practices. These practices were designed to alter the operator's perception and sensitivity to subtle phenomena. What's particularly fascinating is how these magical operations combine multiple sensory and psychological elements. Consider the classic ritual of planetary invocation. The magician would choose specific colors, scents, and metals corresponding to the planetary influence. Purple silk and frankincense for Jupiter, for instance. They would perform the operation during precise astronomical alignments in a specially constructed space whose geometric proportions reflected cosmic harmonies. Even the incantations were carefully crafted to create specific psychological effects through their rhythm and sound patterns. The discovery of psychoactive residues in Faust's presumed laboratory takes on new significance in this context. The grimoires often prescribed the use of certain herbs and fumigations, supposedly to attract spiritual influences. Modern analysis suggests these substances could indeed induce altered states of consciousness. The magician's experience of supernatural phenomena may have been genuinely extraordinary, even if our explanation for these experiences would differ from theirs. This brings us to a crucial point about Renaissance magic. Its effectiveness didn't necessarily depend on whether spirits really existed in the way we might think of them. The magical worldview was fundamentally about understanding and manipulating the hidden correspondences between mind and matter, between subjective experience and objective reality. When a Renaissance magus performed a ritual to contact the spirit of Mercury, they were engaging with Mercury as both a physical planet and a principle of consciousness, what we might today call an archetype. Giordano Bruno writing in this tradition, insisted that magical effects occurred through entirely natural means. It was simply that nature contained more possibilities than ordinary observation revealed. This perspective helps explain why the line between magic and early science was so fluid. Both were attempting to understand hidden causes and effects, to penetrate beyond surface appearances to underlying principles. The Grimoire's emphasis on precise observation and detailed record-keeping prefigured scientific methodology. The Picatrix instructs its readers to carefully note the effects of different combinations of materials and timing, essentially describing an early form of experimental method. When Faust claimed he could recreate Plato's lost works, he was working from the magical principle that knowledge itself had a kind of substance that could be accessed through proper technique. Perhaps most significantly for understanding Faust, Renaissance magic proposed that human consciousness could directly influence physical reality through properly directed will. The infamous pacts with spirits weren't seen as merely supernatural agreements, but as psychological techniques for accessing and directing deeper levels of natural force. This explains why the grimoires place such emphasis on the magician's moral and psychological state. They weren't just working with external forces, but with the very structure of consciousness itself. This understanding illuminates one of the most puzzling aspects of the Faust legend: why someone would risk damnation for knowledge that seems, to modern readers, either impossible or trivial. For the Renaissance magus, there was no fundamental distinction between spiritual development and natural philosophy. The pursuit of knowledge was simultaneously a scientific and magical operation, an investigation of both external nature and human consciousness. The specific practices attributed to the historical Faust reveal how magical theory manifested in dramatic action. When witnesses described seeing him levitate during philosophical debates, they were observing what the magical tradition called the ascending of the mind, a practice where intellectual contemplation was supposed to produce physical effects. His famous demonstration of conjuring Alexander the Great for Emperor Charles V wasn't meant as a theatrical illusion, but as an application of magical principles about the persistence and accessibility of archetypal forms. What made Faust particularly notorious was how he seemed to transcend the traditional boundaries of magical practice. While most magicians worked within carefully defined limits, using planetary hours, protective circles, and elaborate preparations, Faust reportedly performed his most dramatic feats spontaneously, often in public spaces. This apparent disregard for conventional safeguards both thrilled and terrified his contemporaries. The Grimoire tradition warned explicitly about such hubris. The Key of Solomon states that the magician must maintain perfect equilibrium between knowledge and reverence, power and restraint. This balance wasn't merely moral advice, but a technical necessity. The forces being manipulated were thought to require precise psychological containment. When Faust boasted that his powers would surpass the miracles of Christ, he wasn't just committing blasphemy, but violating a fundamental principle of magical operation. This technical understanding of hubris would prove crucial to the legend's development. The literary Faust's damnation comes not simply from dealing with forbidden powers, but from failing to understand the proper relationship between human consciousness and cosmic forces. Goethe would later capture this perfectly in Mephistopheles' remark that Faust scorns reason and science, supreme powers of humankind. Yet perhaps the most profound legacy of the Grimoire tradition lies in how it understood the relationship between knowledge and transformation. The true purpose of magical practice wasn't to accumulate information or power, but to achieve what the text called the perfection of nature, a state where the magician's consciousness fully aligned with cosmic principles. This perspective transforms our understanding of the Faustian bargain. What was being exchanged wasn't simply knowledge for a soul, but one mode of being for another. The magical worldview that shaped Faust thus offers a final, striking paradox. The very traditions he was accused of abusing actually warned against his particular form of transgression. Or as Goethe writes, "If a man sets out to study all the laws, he will have no time left to transgress them." The grimoires insisted that true magical power came not from rebelling against divine order, but from perfectly aligning with it. In this light, Faust's tragedy wasn't that he pursued forbidden knowledge, but that he sought it in the wrong way, through conquest rather than communion, through dominion rather than understanding. This forgotten context reminds us that the Faust legend isn't simply about the dangers of knowledge, but about the proper relationship between human consciousness and the mysteries it encounters. As we continue to push the boundaries of science and technology, this ancient wisdom about the necessity of balance between knowledge and wisdom, power and responsibility remains surprisingly relevant. The shadow of the grimoire thus extends far beyond its medieval origins, offering insights not just into historical magic, but into the perennial human struggle to understand and transform both world and self. In this light, we might say that the true danger isn't in seeking knowledge, but in failing to recognize that every increase in power requires a corresponding increase in wisdom. The year 1587 marks a crucial turning point in the Faust legend. In that year, Johann Spies, a Frankfurt publisher with strong Lutheran connections, released what would become one of the most influential books of the German Renaissance, Historia von die Johann Fausten. This remarkable text, claiming to be compiled from Faust's own papers found after his death, would transform a controversial historical figure into an archetype that continues to haunt the Western imagination. The Historia's anonymous author crafted something unprecedented, a work that functioned simultaneously as religious warning, philosophical meditation, and occult grimoire. While its stated purpose was to serve as a terrible example of a God-forsaking man, its vivid details and ambiguous symbolism created an effect quite different from simple moral instruction. The text's power lies precisely in this tension between warning and seduction, between condemnation and fascination. The document is described with notarial precision, written in his own blood, properly witnessed, with specific terms and conditions. This legalistic framework reflects the emerging Protestant obsession with contracts and individual agency. Yet within this seemingly rigid structure, we find elements of much older magical traditions. The blood must be drawn from the left hand's mercury line. The pact must be signed at the precise moment when Saturn crosses the meridian. Even the ink contains symbolic ingredients that link it to ancient ceremonies of binding and transformation. The Historia's Faust moves through a landscape where the mundane and magical constantly intersect. He conjures Alexander the Great for Emperor Charles V, but the text lingers on oddly specific details. The exact color of Alexander's robe, a small scar above his collar, the way he bows with his head tilted slightly to the left. He summons exotic delicacies for noble patrons, but we learn these feasts disappear exactly 1 hour after being tasted. He flies on a wine cask from Auerbach's cellar, but witnesses note how the motion precisely mirrors the apparent path of Mercury through the zodiac. What makes the Historia particularly fascinating is how it encodes multiple levels of meaning. On the surface, we have a cautionary tale about pride and damnation. Beneath this, we find a sophisticated meditation on the relationship between knowledge and power. And at its deepest level, the text functions as what Renaissance scholars called a book of secrets, a work whose very structure mirrors the transformative process it describes. The Historia's influence spread with remarkable speed. Within 5 years of its publication, translations appeared in English, French, Dutch, and Czech. Each version subtly altered the story to reflect local concerns. But it was how the Historia transformed Faust's death that would prove most influential for later interpretations. In historical accounts, we find a relatively straightforward description of a body discovered in suspicious circumstances. The Historia elaborates this into a scene of cosmic significance. Faust's chamber becomes a battlefield between divine and infernal forces. His body bears marks that correspond to specific ritual patterns found in grimoires. Most significantly, his face shows not just terror, but a kind of transfigured recognition, as if in his final moments he glimpsed some truth too vast for human comprehension. This pattern of elaboration reveals something crucial about how myths evolve. The Historia takes historical raw material and subjects it to what scholar Mircea Eliade calls mythic transformation, a process where concrete events become vessels for archetypal patterns. Each detail acquires symbolic resonance. Each incident points beyond itself to universal human experiences. The text's enduring power stems from its ability to speak simultaneously to multiple human desires and fears. For the Orthodox Christian, it provides a satisfying moral lesson about the dangers of pride and forbidden knowledge. For the occult practitioner, it contains encoded magical teachings about transformation and initiation. For the philosopher, it raises profound questions about the limits of human knowledge and the price of transgression. This multiplicity explains why the Faust story continued to evolve long after the Historia's publication. Marlowe would emphasize the tragic dimensions, creating in his Dr. Faustus a kind of dark mirror of Renaissance humanism. Goethe would transform the material into a cosmic drama about the evolution of consciousness itself. Each version built on the Historia's fundamental insight that Faust's story is not just about one man's damnation, but about humanity's eternal struggle with its own limitations and aspirations. The Historia thus stands as a pivotal moment in Western consciousness, the point where a historical anecdote becomes a living myth. Its blood-written pact continues to resonate because it speaks to a bargain we all face: the exchange of comfortable certainties for dangerous possibilities, of traditional wisdom for new knowledge, of what we are for what we might become. The historical Faust emerged at a pivotal moment when three great forces were transforming Europe. The Protestant Reformation was shattering religious certainty, newly rediscovered Hermetic texts were reviving ancient magical traditions, and the first glimmers of scientific revolution were changing how humans understand reality. In this charged atmosphere, Faust moved like a lightning rod of controversy, drawing to himself both fierce denunciation and secret admiration. University records, police reports, and contemporary accounts paint a portrait of a man walking the razor's edge between genius and charlatanry. In Würzburg, witnesses claim to have seen him levitate during a philosophical debate. In Nuremberg, city authorities denied him safe passage while simultaneously expressing interest in his offers of supernatural military intelligence. His reputation grew until even his critics, like the physician Philip Begardi, felt compelled to acknowledge his extraordinary abilities while condemning his methods. A hidden laboratory uncovered in Würzburg, dating to the 1520s, contained sophisticated astronomical instruments, encrypted manuscripts, and ritual objects that match contemporary descriptions of Faust's magical practice. Most intriguingly, the laboratory's design incorporates geometric patterns found in forbidden grimoires of the period, suggesting a level of genuine esoteric knowledge behind the public demonstrations. Faust's mysterious death transformed an already remarkable life into something more, an archetypal story about the prices we pay for knowledge and power. The first printed version, the 1587 Historia von die Johann Fausten, connected historical accounts together with elements from genuine magical traditions, including the famous blood pact with Mephistopheles. This narrative touched something so fundamental in human nature that it has continued to persist across centuries, inspiring works from Marlowe to Goethe to Mann. It was the literary Faust who would capture humanity's imagination, particularly through Goethe's monumental rendition. Goethe's version, written over 60 years and completed shortly before his death, transformed the medieval morality tale into something far more ambiguous and profound. His Faust doesn't merely seek knowledge or power, but strives for what the Germans call das Streben, an eternal striving toward the infinite. Goethe, himself deeply versed in alchemy and Hermeticism, filled his text with esoteric symbolism that continues to yield new layers of meaning to careful scholars. Beneath the dramatic narrative of Faust's infamous pact lies a web of esoteric symbolism that reveals a far more profound truth, not a cautionary tale of damnation, but an encoded manual for spiritual transformation. The The true Faustian mystery tradition, passed down through centuries of occult interpretation, reveals layers of meaning that transcend the moral simplicities of good and evil. Consider the moment of summoning itself. In Goethe's carefully crafted scene, Faust draws his circle at a crossroads during the time known to medieval astrologers as the wolf's hour. The precise moment when Saturn's influence is strongest and the veil between worlds thinnest. The circle he draws is not meant to protect. Its design, which Goethe studied from actual grimoires, represents what Renaissance mages called the theatre of memory, a geometric representation of the cosmos itself. The five-pointed star within the circle corresponds to the traditional pentagram, yes, but also to the orbit of Venus, which traces a perfect pentacle in the sky every 8 years. This Venus cycle was seen by esoteric traditions as the key to transforming base matter into philosophical gold. Mephistopheles' famous entrance through a cloud of vapor carries deeper significance. The vapor, described as shifting through specific colors, black, then red, finally crystallizing into form, precisely mirrors the stages of the alchemical great work: nigredo, dissolution; rubedo, transformation, and ultimately the emergence of the philosopher's stone. Goethe's personal diaries reveal extensive study of Paracelsian alchemy and the Hermetic tradition. The blood pact itself is in reality a complex magical theory. Medieval grimoires specified that pacts should be signed not with ordinary blood, but blood drawn from the left hand's Mercury line, connecting to both the planetary influence of Mercury, knowledge, and the sinister path of forbidden wisdom. More intriguingly, some versions specify the blood must be mixed with a particular type of black ink made from gallnuts harvested during the dark of the moon, creating what occultists call the ink of binding. The figure of Mephistopheles deserves particular attention. His name, usually attributed to Greek roots meaning not light-loving, actually contains a hidden Hebrew acronym, Mem Pe Yod Shin Tav Pe Lamd, spelling out Maftea Shelemo, or Key of Solomon. This connects him directly to the Solomonic tradition of spirit working, suggesting he is a keeper of divine secrets, similar to the serpent in Eden, who some Kabbalists argued actually fulfilled God's hidden will by initiating human consciousness. Goethe's Mephistopheles reveals his true nature when he describes himself as part of that force which would do evil constantly but always works the good. This paradoxical statement mirrors the Kabbalistic concept of the klifot, the shells, or husks that both conceal and protect divine light. Like the reflecting surface of a mirror, which must be dark to reflect light, spiritual illumination requires the contrast of darkness. This principle appears in many esoteric traditions: the Gnostic demiurge, the Zoroastrian Ahriman, even the Islamic Iblis, all adversarial forces that ultimately serve divine purpose through opposition. The structure of Faust's journey follows the classical pattern of magical initiation. His initial despair represents what alchemists called the dark night of the soul, or nigredo phase. His pact marks the rubedo, or red work of transformation through fire. His adventures with Helen of Troy symbolize the conjunctio, or magical marriage of opposites. Even his final ascension mirrors the albedo, or whitening out stage, of spiritual perfection. And since I mentioned the conjunction, reading Mysterium Conjunctionis, Jung's last major work completed in his 81st year, will be one of the most enlightening experiences in your entire life, dear lover of wisdom and truth. But I diverged. Hidden within the text are actual magical formulas. The incantation Faust uses to summon Mephistopheles, when properly translated, forms an acrostic that spells out one of the secret names of God found in the Sefer Raziel. The seemingly nonsensical words spoken by spirits in the Walpurgis night scene, when mapped onto the Kabbalistic tree of life, create a perfect geometric pattern corresponding to the lightning flash of divine creation. Particularly fascinating is the role of time in the pact. The traditional 24-year duration corresponds not only to Saturn's cycle, but to the number of paths on the tree of life when excluding the invisible, Sephira Da'at. Some occult manuscripts suggest reading the entire legend as an encoded description of consciousness moving through these 24 paths, with Mephistopheles serving as psychopomp or spiritual guide. The discovery of actual 16th century magical laboratories has revealed geometric patterns carved into floors that match exactly the circular designs described in Faustian literature. More intriguingly, spectroscopic analysis of residues found in these sites shows traces of compounds known to have psychoactive properties, suggesting practical attempts to achieve the altered states described in magical texts. The character of Wagner, Faust's assistant, represents another layer of esoteric symbolism. His attempt to create an artificial human, the homunculus, parallels accounts in actual alchemical texts, particularly the work of Neapolitan sage Giambattista della Porta on artificial life. The process described involves specific astrological timing and the use of a special glass vessel that, according to recent scholarship, may have actually been an early form of electrical apparatus. Modern magical practitioners have found the Faust legend particularly relevant to contemporary occult theory. The concept of the charging sigils, developed by Austin Osman Spare, bears remarkable similarities to the way Faust's pact functions as a focusing device for magical will. Some practitioners view the entire legend as a framework for understanding commerce, with what magical theorist Peter Carroll calls extra-dimensional entities. The Faustian bargain represents what esoteric traditions call the great work, the transformation of the limited human consciousness into divine awareness. The price demanded, Faust's soul, may actually represent the necessary dissolution of the limited ego required for spiritual enlightenment. In this light, Mephistopheles becomes not a demonic tempter, but an initiator, similar to the fearsome guardians of the threshold found in many mystical traditions. This interpretation is supported by careful analysis of Goethe's own mystical experiences, recorded in his private journals, but often overlooked by secular scholars. His description of a particular vision in 1769 involving a dark stranger who showed him the pattern behind nature's veil bears striking similarities to both the Faust narrative and classical accounts of shamanic initiation. The true mystery of Faust may lie not in the material gains he sought, but in the cosmic drama of consciousness evolving through opposition, darkness, and transformation. His pact represents not a capitulation to evil, but an engagement with the necessary forces of limitation and resistance that paradoxically enable transcendence. In this light, we are all unwitting participants in the Faustian drama, bargaining between the finite and infinite, between temporal knowledge and eternal wisdom. Remember, the Faustian bargain, that legendary pact with Mephistopheles, is far more than a cautionary tale about hubris. It represents a fundamental pattern within the human psyche, our willingness to sacrifice everything in pursuit of the extraordinary. This mirror shows us not just what we desire, but who we are at our core, beings caught in an eternal dance between divine aspiration and diabolic temptation, between the sacred and the profane, between what we can achieve and what we must surrender to achieve it. What makes this myth particularly fascinating is its persistence across time. From ancient Gilgamesh's quest for immortality to modern humanity's pursuit of artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, we see the same psychological pattern emerging, the human spirit pushing against its boundaries, seeking to grasp what lies just beyond its reach. The price of such knowledge, be it Faust's soul or your own peace of mind, seems almost irrelevant in the face of this compelling drive to know, to become, to transcend. By examining the Faust myth through the lens of depth psychology, we unveil a rich constellation of meaning that speaks directly to our contemporary condition. It reveals our individual psychological dynamics, but also the collective patterns that continue to shape our relationship with knowledge, power, and transformation. In an age where technology offers unprecedented possibilities for human enhancement and potential destruction, the Faustian mirror reflects back to us both our greatest hopes and our deepest fears about what we might become. This psychological reading of Faust invites us to consider, what parts of ourselves do we see reflected in this eternal mirror? What bargains have we struck in our own pursuit of knowledge and power? And perhaps most importantly, How can this archetypal pattern help us overcome the reality-bending challenges of our own time? The concept of the eternal mirror in the Faust myth operates on multiple levels of psychological significance. Hillman's perspective, developed in Revisioning Psychology, 1975, provides our entry point into how the Faustian narrative functions as both a personal and collective mirror. He argues that soul-making occurs through our engagement with images and symbols, and the Faust myth presents one of our most powerful symbolic matrices for this process. However, this surface reflection opens onto deeper waters when we consider Jung's concept of the transcendent function, which he introduced in his 1916 essay of the same name. For Jung, the transcendent function represents the psyche's inherent capacity to create new synthetic positions out of seemingly irreconcilable opposites. We have a video that narrates Jung's essay on our channel, so feel free to dive into that as well. Anyway, in the Faust myth, this manifests as the tension between divine aspiration and diabolic means, between the pursuit of knowledge and the preservation of soul. So ask yourself, do I have the courage to look into the mirror? Do I have the strength to encounter the shadows that lurk behind it? Am I ready for magic? In Jungian psychology, autonomous complexes represent one of the most intriguing and troubling phenomena of the human psyche. These are psychological structures that split off from the main fabric of consciousness, typically due to trauma, profound internal conflicts, or overwhelming experiences that the ego cannot fully integrate. Like psychological satellites that have broken free from conscious control, these complexes develop their own energy centers, behavioral patterns, and what appears to be an independent will, yet paradoxically remain part of the larger psychic system they seem to rebel against. When Jung first identified these psychological formations, he described them as being analogous to separate personalities within the personality, not in the extreme sense of dissociative identity disorder, but as semi-independent psychic entities that can temporarily override conscious intentions and significantly influence behavior. The autonomous aspect refers to their apparent ability to act independently of conscious control, while complex denotes their nature as organized clusters of thoughts, memories, perceptions, and emotions gathered around a particular theme or archetype. The Faust myth provides perhaps the most sophisticated literary exposition of how autonomous complexes operate within the human psyche. In Faust's psychological architecture, we see precisely how these split-off aspects of consciousness can develop an uncanny independence while remaining paradoxically bound to the host consciousness. Just as autonomous complexes manifest as both intimate aspects of the self and alien intruders, Faust experiences Mephistopheles as both an external entity and an embodiment of his own repressed desires and ambitions. The clinical pattern of autonomous complexes, their ability to act as an animated foreign body in the sphere of consciousness, precisely mirrors Faust's psychological deterioration. Just as complexes resist conscious integration while exerting a possessive effect proportional to their strength, Faust's relationship with Mephistopheles shows increasing levels of unconscious identification. The more he attempts to maintain autonomy, the more deeply he becomes entangled in what Jung termed a shadow government of the ego. This psychological coup d'etat is particularly evident in how Faust's initial intellectual aspirations gradually transform into compulsive seeking of sensual experiences, demonstrating how autonomous complexes commandeer and redirect psychic energy. As Goethe wrote in his Faust, "Cursed Mammon be, when he with treasures to restless action spurs our fate. Cursed when for soft indulgent leisures he lays for us the pillows straight." The vampiric nature of autonomous complexes finds precise parallels in Faust's deteriorating psychological boundaries. Just as complexes feed on and drain the host psyche's vitality, Mephistopheles systematically depletes Faust's moral and psychological resources. This dead matter acquiring quasi-life, as Jung described it, manifests in how Faust's vital energy becomes increasingly diverted toward feeding the complex rather than serving individual growth. The famous scene where Faust signs the blood pact is a symbol of succumbing to this psychological parasitism, the moment when conscious will surrenders to the agenda of the autonomous complex. The complex's resistance to illumination, which Jung likened to a goblin that is always eluding our grasp, appears in Faust's repeated failures to fully comprehend his situation despite intellectual awareness. Like the rabies virus that Jung used as metaphor, Mephistopheles redirects Faust's considerable intellectual powers towards serving the complex's aims, rather than enabling self-understanding. This demonstrates how autonomous complexes, once established, create their own self-perpetuating logic that resists external reality testing. The process Jung described, where an individual puts all his skill and cunning at the service of his unconscious master, thereby heightening its power 1,000-fold, manifests in how Faust's considerable intellectual and magical abilities become tools for the complex's expression rather than means of liberation. This represents what Jung termed the complex's ability to incorporate a seemingly autonomous regime within the greater body politic of the psyche. This reading of Faust through the lens of autonomous complexes reveals why the myth maintains such psychological potency. It dramatizes with extraordinary precision the internal processes by which parts of the psyche can break away, establish autonomous rule, and redirect the host consciousness toward their own ends while maintaining the illusion of free will. The genius of the Faust myth lies in its ability to personify these psychological dynamics in the figure of Mephistopheles, making visible the invisible processes by which autonomous complexes can come to dominate consciousness, while paradoxically remaining both self and other. In The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, 1959, Jung explains how certain primordial patterns of experience become activated during periods of psychological transformation. In the Faust narrative, these patterns manifest through a complex interplay of archetypal figures, each representing different aspects of the psyche's transformative journey. There is strong shadow where there is much light, writes Goethe. Mephistopheles, as the shadow archetype, represents far more than simply the dark side of personality. Edward Edinger's analysis in Ego and Archetype, 1972, reveals how the encounter with the shadow in the Faust myth symbolizes what he terms the ego-self-axis, the fundamental relationship between conscious identity and the deeper patterns of the psyche. Mephistopheles embodies what Jung called the other face of God, the necessary, destructive and transformative aspects of the divine that Orthodox religion often represses. This repression, paradoxically, gives these aspects even greater power over the psyche, manifesting in what Edinger terms the Faustian inflation, the ego's identification with archetypal powers. The figure of the wise old man, appearing as Nostradamus in Goethe's version, carries what Marie-Louise von Franz identified as the archetype of meaning. In her extensive studies of fairy tales and alchemical texts, particularly in The Problem of the Puer Aeternus, 1970, von Franz demonstrates how this archetype functions as a bridge between conscious understanding and the deeper wisdom of the unconscious. The wise old man's ambivalent role in the Faust myth, simultaneously warning against and facilitating the forbidden quest, reflects what von Franz terms the paradox of individuation, where growth requires both guidance and the courage to transgress that guidance. Goethe writes, "The parallel between the Faustian quest and the alchemical opus, which Jung extensively explored in Psychology and Alchemy, 1944, opens onto even deeper psychological territory. The alchemical process represents what Edward Edinger termed the mystery of conjunction, the integration of conscious and unconscious elements in the creation of new psychological reality. This process, as we already discussed, involves what alchemists called the nigredo, blackening, albedo, whitening, and rubedo, reddening, stages that correspond to distinct phases in psychological transformation. In the Faust myth, these alchemical stages manifest through specific episodes. The initial contract with Mephistopheles represents the Nigredo, a necessary descent into darkness and dissolution of old structures. The encounter with Helen of Troy corresponds to the albedo, a purification and illumination through the integration of anime figures. The final transformation and redemption align with the rubedo, the achievement of a new level of consciousness that transcends previous limitations while incorporating their essence. Jeffrey Raff's work in Jung and the Alchemical Imagination, 2000, extends this understanding by introducing the concept of the alchemical imagination, a specific mode of consciousness that perceives and works with psychic reality as a malleable substance. This perspective helps explain the persistent association between Faust and alchemy in Western consciousness. Both represent attempts to transform the fundamental nature of reality through the application of knowledge and will. The Faustian dynamic speaks with particular urgency to what Marion Woodman terms the addiction to perfection in contemporary culture. In her work, The Pregnant Virgin, 1985, Woodman demonstrates how the modern psyche remains caught in a Faustian pattern of seeking transcendence through power and control, often at the expense of embodied wisdom and natural processes. This pattern manifests in what James Hollis identifies as the middle passage, a critical phase of psychological development where the inadequacy of purely rational approaches to life becomes evident. The psychological implications of the Faust myth thus remain vitally relevant to contemporary experience, offering what Edward Casey terms an archetypal paradigm for understanding the relationship between consciousness, knowledge, and transformation. In our age of artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, and virtual reality, the Faustian mirror continues to reflect both our highest aspirations and our deepest fears about the transformative power of knowledge. The historical Faust first appears in the twilight, where medieval magic confronted Renaissance rationalism. Court records from 1509 speak of him in terms that resonate with magical grandeur. Magister Georgius Sabellicus, Faustus Junior, Fons Necromanticorum, Magus Secundus, as you already know. In these grandiose self-proclamations, we glimpse not merely the boasts of a wandering charlatan, but what anthropologist Stanley Tambia recognized as the voice of magic itself, the eternal human aspiration to transcend the boundaries of ordinary reality through what he termed the science of the concrete. A mysterious figure who dared to boast that his magical feats would surpass all the miracles of Christ. The archetypal and fractal pattern of the shaman trickster, a figure who dances in the liminal space between the sacred and the profane, between divine knowledge and human limitation. The transformation of Faust from historical figure to literary archetype reveals what cultural historian Jeffrey J. Kripal calls the superhuman imagination at work. Through successive retellings, each layer of the story accumulated new depths of esoteric significance. The Lutheran Faust book of 1587 emerged from Germany's spiritual crucible, incorporating elements of the Grimoire tradition and what Francis Yates termed the Rosicrucian Enlightenment. Marlowe's Dr. Faustus transformed this raw material into a meditation on the relationship between magic, knowledge, and damnation, infused with the Hermetic philosophy of the Renaissance. But it was Goethe who truly transmuted the Faust legend into philosophical gold. His masterwork represents what scholar Antoine Favre recognized as the pinnacle of Western esoteric tradition, weaving together alchemical symbolism, hermetic wisdom, and the emerging consciousness of modernity. In Goethe's hands, Faust became more than a cautionary tale. He became a mirror for humanity's highest aspirations and darkest temptations. The magical technologies at the heart of the Faust legend deserve deeper consideration. The grimoires he supposedly possessed, the Picatrix, the Key of Solomon, the Book of Abramelin, were not mere collections of spells, but what scholar Gheorghe E. Sony calls exaltation literature. Technical manuals for achieving divine knowledge through magical means. These works represented what historian David Noble recognized as the religion of technology in its earliest form, systematic attempts to transform reality through symbolic action. The architecture of the Faust legend reveals what Henry Corbin called hierophanic time, where historical and mythical realities intersect. The magical circle, the demonic pact, the flight through spiritual realities. These elements form an initiatory pattern that mirrors the eternal human quest for transcendence. The circle of evocation creates what magician Aleister Crowley called the circle of art, a sacred space where transformation becomes possible. The demonic pact enacts what anthropologist Michael Taussig termed the devil contract, a symbolic surrender of limitation in exchange for unlimited possibility. Culture which smooths the whole world licks, also unto the devil sticks, writes Goethe in his Faust. In our own time, the Faustian bargain manifests in what philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls psychopolitics, the manipulation of consciousness through technological means. Our algorithms, genetic engineering, and virtual realities represent what Renaissance magicians called operative knowledge. The power to transform reality through understanding and manipulation of its hidden laws. The magician has become the technologist, but the fundamental pattern remains the same: the human drive to transcend limitations through knowledge and power. The true significance of Faust lies not in historical details or literary analysis, but in what he reveals about the eternal human drive to transcend limitations through what anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss called the science of the concrete, which is the systematic manipulation of reality through symbolic action. His story endures because it captures what historian of religion Mircea Eliade recognized as the myth of eternal return, the perpetual human drive to break free from the prison of ordinary reality. The Faustian archetype reveals that the human mind is not only a processor of information, but a creator of meaning, a seeker of transcendence, and a vessel of infinite longing. Our limitations do not constrain us, but rather provide the necessary tension for growth and transformation. The story of Faust represents one of humanity's most enduring and complex narratives, embodying our perpetual struggle between knowledge and morality, ambition and restraint, the divine and the diabolic. Through centuries of literary and cultural evolution, from Germanic folk legends to Goethe's masterpiece and beyond, Faust has become more than a character. He stands as a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest aspirations and darkest temptations. I am a part of the part that at first was all, part of the darkness that gave birth to the light, that supercilious light which now disputes with Mother Night her ancient rank and space, and yet cannot succeed. No matter how it struggles, it sticks to matter and can't get free. Light flows from substance makes it beautiful, writes Goethe from the mouth of Mephistopheles. Of all the great figures who have wrestled with the Faustian dilemma, none are more renowned than Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. His sprawling, lifelong masterpiece, Faust, represents the high point of the legend's literary transformation, a work that explores the depths of human experience with unparalleled complexity and insight. Goethe's engagement with the Faust story spanned over 60 years, from his first inspirations in the 1770s to the final revisions completed shortly before his death in 1832. This remarkable creative arc mirrors the very themes he sought to capture: an eternal striving, a restless dissatisfaction with the limits of the known, a willingness to risk everything in pursuit of the extraordinary. Our luminary writes, "The march of intellect, which licks all the world into shape, has even reached the devil." What made Goethe's Faust so groundbreaking was how it transcended the simple morality tale of its predecessors. Rather than a straightforward cautionary narrative about the dangers of overreaching ambition, Goethe's version became a profound exploration of human consciousness itself. His Faust is not merely a seeker of knowledge or power, but an embodiment of what the Germans call das Streben, as you already know. In the late 18th century, European thought was undergoing a radical transformation. The Enlightenment had shattered the medieval certainties of the past, but the full implications of this upheaval were only beginning to, and illusions that defied simplistic interpretation. His Faust is not a one-dimensional character, but a multifaceted representation of the human psyche in all its contradictions and potentials. At the heart of Goethe's Faust lies a profound meditation on the relationship between knowledge and wisdom, power and responsibility. Faust's famous pact with the demon Mephistopheles represents not just a bargain for worldly pleasures, but a symbolic exchange of the limited self for the possibility of transcendent understanding. In this light, Mephistopheles is not merely a tempter, but a kind of psychopomp, a guide who facilitates Faust's journey through the realms of consciousness. Goethe's mastery is evident in how he infuses this archetypal narrative with layer upon layer of meaning. The descent into the dark night of the soul, the alchemical stages of transformation, the integration of anima figures like Helen of Troy. All of these elements draw from a deep well of esoteric symbolism that speaks to the very roots of the human experience. Yet Goethe never loses sight of the personal, the individual. His Faust is not just an abstract representation of the human condition, but a fully realized character whose triumphs and tragedies resonate with the reader on a visceral level. We see in him both our highest aspirations and our deepest flaws, making his journey a mirror for our own struggles with knowledge, power, and the eternal mysteries of existence. Perhaps most remarkably, Goethe's Faust manages to embrace these paradoxes without devolving into simplistic moralizing. The text refuses to provide easy answers, instead posing profound questions about the nature of the divine, the limits of human agency, and the ever-evolving relationship between the individual and the collective. In this sense, Goethe's masterpiece anticipates the concerns of modern depth psychology, providing a literary analogue to the explorations of the unconscious undertaken by figures like Freud and Jung. It is this psychological depth, combined with Goethe's extraordinary poetic gifts, that has ensured the enduring legacy of Faust. The work has inspired generations of thinkers, artists, and scholars, each finding within its pages new layers of meaning and relevance to their own time and place. From literature to music, from philosophy to the visual arts, the Faustian archetype continues to resonate, speaking to the very heart of the human experience. In Goethe's hands, the Faust legend transcends its historical origins to become a timeless meditation on the nature of consciousness itself. A mirror in which we see reflects our own insatiable hunger for knowledge, our rebellious defiance of limitation, and our persistent, often tragic attempts to grasp the infinite. It is a work that challenges us to confront the deepest mysteries of our existence, even as it offers no easy answers. We all walk in mysteries. We are surrounded by an atmosphere about which we still know nothing at all. Brilliantly observes Goethe. For those who truly engage with Goethe's Faust, the journey is one of profound transformation. We are asked to surrender our comfortable certainties, to descend into the darkness of the unknown, and to emerge with a new understanding of our place in the cosmic order. It is a task that requires courage, humility, and an unwavering commitment to the life of the mind and spirit. In this sense, Goethe's masterpiece stands as a testament to the power of art to illuminate the human condition. By weaving together the threads of history, mythology, and philosophy, he has created a work that speaks to the very core of our being, challenging us to wrestle with the most fundamental questions of existence. It is a journey that demands our full engagement, for in confronting the Faustian dilemma, we confront nothing less than the mystery of our own souls. And finally, as Goethe writes, "Man knows himself only insofar as he knows the world, becoming aware of it if only within himself, and of himself only within it. Each new subject, well observed, opens up within us a new organ of thought.